There is grandeur in this view of life.
Welcome to Evolution Talk with Rick Coast, an introduction to the oldest story ever told.
If you were to come across the Tree of Life, you would find a vast and vibrant tapestry of colors, shapes, and sizes. You would see failures, short-lived successes, and designs that have lasted for centuries. That's how nature works. It's not a straight line of development. That was Plato's view of the world, his great chain of being, which invoked the simple to the complex, from worms to, well, us. Plato saw a hierarchy in nature, sort of a ladder, and near the top of the rung was mankind, and above mankind was something. He called it the demiurge. Aristotle called it the unmoved mover, and the point being that animals are higher than plants and humans are above them all. Rocks and dirt sit at the bottom of the ladder. Lose one of the rungs on the ladder and you render it almost useless. You have a missing rung, or a missing link.
In the model of the evolutionary tree, man and apes are said to share a common ancestor. However, evidence of that common ancestor is highly contested. That's why it is still called the missing link.
That was Charlton Heston, the same man who also uttered the famous words,
"Take your sticking paws off me, you damn dirty ape!"
from the 1968 film Planet of the Apes. When I was a kid, the term missing link meant something. It implied a great search for a mythical creature, and I imagined as a kid that this creature existed somewhere, a sort of caveman still hiding in some cold and dark cave somewhere, a creature that would serve as proof that there was a connection between man and apes. I didn't understand why that was possible or even how, but I still wondered what this thing would look like, and I assumed that science was trying to find it, or at least someone was. I had no idea that the term itself was deceiving, or even that it had been used almost 120 years before I was even born. And that was by Charles Lyell, who had been Charles Darwin's mentor.
Newly discovered fossils serve to fill up gaps between specific or generic types previously familiar to us, supplying often the missing links of the chain.
Darwin himself never used the term missing link. Now, he wasn't concerned with a missing link, but he was concerned with gaps in the fossil record. It wasn't that he thought these gaps hurt his theory in any way. He had no doubt as to its validity. His fear was how those gaps would be used to attack his theory, or how they might be misunderstood or even misinterpreted. My childhood imagination was a perfect example of how this misunderstanding works. In my mind, there were primates and there was man, and between the two stood a figure shrouded in mystery. And I wasn't alone. This was the prevailing notion in the public's mind throughout the early 20th century. The media used it, movies used it, and the papers used it. The implication was, since it was missing, Darwin's theory of evolution had to be incomplete. When Darwin published On the Origin of Species in 1859, you have to remember that the fossil record wasn't much of a record. There had been fossils discovered, but those discoveries were only the tip of the iceberg. Nobody had any idea how deep or how big this iceberg really was. Darwin's theory was all about transitions, from one species to another, a beautiful and elegant tree of life. The fossil record at the time was warped. Those transitional fossils had yet to be heard from. To him, the perception that these transitional fossils might not exist was, and I quote, "the most obvious and gravest objection which can be urged against my theory." The problem is that fossils simply are not easy to come by. Darwin said this himself. It was an issue he was keenly aware of.
The crust of the Earth is a vast museum, but the natural collections have been imperfectly made, and only at long intervals of time.
And finding fossils isn't the only problem. The reason they aren't falling out of every shovelful of dirt is that they're not easy to make. Nature first needs something to work with. Soft-bodied organisms don't lend themselves very well to fossilization. Nature needs organisms with hard body parts, and even then, the conditions have to be just right for fossilization to occur. The fact that we have as many fossils as we do can almost be chalked up to pure luck, with some grand exceptions, of course. The biggest exception being the fossil of Tiktaalik, which was discovered on Ellesmere Island in Canada by Neil Shubin and his team. That discovery was a brilliant case of detective work and prediction, science at its best. Not only was it a fossil, it was a transitional fossil that represented the movement of life from the sea to dry land. The truth of the matter is that the fossil record is so incomplete that 99% of the species that walked this planet will forever be completely unknown to us. And when we do find a fossil, it's a cause for celebration. But then the real work begins, knowing what exactly it is that we found.
So each new fossil, or new animal indeed, that's discovered is always given a Linnaean binomial name, a specific name preceded by a generic name, like Homo sapiens, Australopithecus, Africanus, or whatever it is.
That's Professor Richard Dawkins. So once we've begun the process of identifying it, there's also the challenge of placing it.
When a fossil is actually intermediate between two species or two genera, we are not allowed by our conventions of nomenclature to give it an intermediate name. There's no machinery in language to give a name that is intermediate between, say, Australopithecus afarensis and Homo habilis. Yet, if there must have been a member of the genus Homo that was the immediate child of a member of the genus Australopithecus, but you can immediately see that that's nonsense, because how could a baby be a different genus from its mother? Obviously, in every single case, every baby born is the same species, let alone the same genus, as its mother.
Now listen to this part closely.
If you were to walk backwards down through your ancestral tree, starting with your mother, and then your grandmother, great-grandmother, let's just stick to females for convenience, great-great-grandmother, and so on, you would go back and back and back and back and back, go back as far as you like, and gradually the animals that you were walking past, as you walk past your ancestors, would be gradually, ever so slowly changing into something else. By the time you got back to about 6 or 7 million years ago, you would be looking at an animal which was the common ancestor between ourselves and chimpanzees.
But why stop there? You could continue to go back. If you kept walking along this line of ancestors, you would eventually, and after a lot of walking, get to the point where the ancestor looks nothing like a human being. You could be nose to snout with a small, four-legged reptile. What it really boils down to is false information, and a general lack of understanding about who our ancestors were, or how we even know who they were. Take the popular concept that we evolved from chimpanzees. I have no idea where that one started, but I'd be willing to wager that if you were to stop 10 people on the street and ask them if we descended from chimps, you might get 2 to 3 yeses and 6 to 7 no's. And you might get that one person who says that the entire question is wrong, that of course we didn't descend from chimps.
That's not the way evolution works. We're not descended from them. Yes. We're cousins of them. So we and they go back to a common ancestor. They're the chimpanzees, there's us. We go back to a common ancestor. Now, that common ancestor was not a chimpanzee and it was not a human. It was something else. And it evolved towards being a chimpanzee. Yes. In a different direction, it evolved towards being a human. So chimpanzees have been evolving all that time, okay, and humans have been evolving all that time. Okay. And they'll probably both go on evolving, but we can't predict where that will go.
You won't have a missing link, but you will have a missing branch. Even when one understands that we evolved separately from chimpanzees, orangutans, and modern apes, there is still this idea that we are missing something. The thing to remember is that our evolution didn't jump from an Australopithecine to something which looked more human, and then to us in a couple of generations. It was a slow, gradual change that took millions of years. And you won't find that one definitive link between the two, that one creature who stands in the middle to prove it all happened. In the most perfect of worlds, we would have specimens that stretched back through time. And what we would see from specimen to specimen is that they all pretty much look alike. The child looks like her parent, and so it continues on into the past. It's only when you compare the specimens from the distant or the far distant past to one from today that the differences are obvious. Unfortunately, of course, we don't live in that perfect world, and all we have is a few skeletons and bones to help piece it all together. The tree of life has so many branches that you would have a hard time counting them all. Think of it like a long, meandering river. It turns, it splits off, and those splits split off again. All of those side tributaries can be traced back to the original river and eventually back to its source. There are also tributaries and streams which dry up, never to be seen again. Linking them all up in any definitive way would be close to impossible. We've made great headway in understanding our own past, and to say we have a long way to go is a big understatement. There are no missing links. There are shadows of ancestors who may never be able to step into the light. We just need to keep the candle burning. They might eventually find their way home, and imagine what a grand reunion that would be. Evolution Talk is written and produced by myself, Rick Coast. The music on this episode was composed and performed by Poddington Bear. Thank you for listening, and until next time, please take care of yourself.
Why has no one found the missing link between modern humans and ancient apes?
We did find it. It's called Homo erectus.
Then you have proven my case, sir. For no one has found the link between apes and this Homo erectus.
Yes, they have. It's called Homo habilis.
Aha! But no one has found the missing link between ape and the so-called Homo habilis.
Yes, they have. It's called Australopithecus africanus.
Evolution Talk is a Rick Coast production.